This happened a little while ago. I live with my boyfriend, and the other night he went out to drink with his friends. He said that he was probably going to be out late. I stayed up as late as I could, but when he wasn't back by 2 a.m., I got a bit worried. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. I guessed that it must have run out of battery. Even if that was the case, he said he'd get the last train home, and it was too late now. I was annoyed and tired of waiting for him, so I just went to bed. I got under the blanket and shut my eyes. Then I heard the sound of keys at the door, and then the sound of the door opening. I pretended to be asleep. I didn't feel like dealing with him, and I was still mad. I heard him rummaging and rustling around, bumping into things, because he didn't turn the light on. As he approached, I could smell alcohol and cigarette smoke. He was breathing like an idiot too. It was really annoying. I was so mad at him. Usually when he comes back drunk like this, he's usually in the mood for you-know-what. Well, he had no chance of that tonight. I heard his footsteps nearing the end of the bed, and then the bed creaked as he climbed in. When he got closer to me, I realized that something was wrong. My boyfriend had a lean and fit body. The body next to me at that time was flabby, and the skin was cold. I was petrified. I slowly opened my eyes to see a fat man of about 40 years old lying next to me. He was holding a pair of scissors between his lips. They were my scissors. I had left them on the coffee table. My eyes met his. He was glaring at me. Then I realized that this complete stranger was completely naked. I tried to scream, but nothing came out besides a gasping noise. I struggled against him and managed to roll out of bed. I ran out of the apartment, completely barefoot. I ran into my boyfriend, the real one this time. He was coming in the apartment's entrance doors, just as I was running out of them into the cold December night. I tried to explain what had happened, but I couldn't stop shaking and panicking. After about 10 minutes or so, I managed to stop hyperventilating, and I got myself together. I explained to my boyfriend what had happened, and we went back to the apartment together to check it over. I wasn't afraid to go back there. I wanted this guy caught. When we got back to the apartment, we found no one there. Our laminate floor was covered in some liquid. Water, maybe. There was some weird gloopy red stuff as well. I didn't know what the hell that was. I also have no clue to this day how this guy had a copy of our key. I know he must have had a key because I heard the door open with a key. It definitely wasn't a lockpick or anything like that. My boyfriend and I were the only ones with a set of keys. We had no duplicates. It was a new building, so there was no chance of a former resident turning up. We made an arrangement with the landlord that the locks would be changed immediately, and then changed every 4 months. I'm glad my boyfriend came back when he did. It was not a dream.
This happened recently, but enough time has passed for me to feel okay about talking about it. I was a student when this went down, and I was a pretty shit student at that. I spent most of my academic years gaming online, ignoring my university classes. I would play from morning until night. What a total waste of time, huh? I was completely glued to my computer's monitor. I was barely aware of my surroundings. I would look up, and I'd see the first light of morning without realizing a night had passed. I knew I would probably have to repeat a year, but for some reason, I just didn't care. If I was going to repeat a year, I was going to have fun doing it. There I was one night, no different than any other, computer mouse clicking away, gaming, when suddenly the doorbell rang. Like most apartments, my one had a doorbell below on the street, which connected to my room. When someone comes, they'd press the bell, and then I'd buzz them in, and they'd head upstairs. It's a pretty common setup, right? On that night, the doorbell rang at 2 a.m. I only noticed the time because I had to pause my game. I thought about going over to see who was there, but I hesitated. The first thought that came to my mind was that it would be a pain in the ass to leave the game, not who the hell would be ringing the doorbell so late. When I thought about the latter, I realized that a late night unannounced visitor wouldn't probably be someone I'd like to deal with. So I ignored the doorbell and carried on with my game. I thought that whoever was out there would give up after about 5 minutes or so and go home. Anyway, this person's persistence surpassed my expectations. They rang the doorbell continuously for over 10 minutes. I had no idea who would want to see me this bad in the middle of the night, so I kept on ignoring it. It pissed me off. Have you ever heard a doorbell repeatedly ring for 10 minutes straight? Finally, the doorbell stopped ringing, and I thought that was the end of that. Boy, was I wrong. Before I knew it, I could hear something outside my patio doors. I lived on the ground floor, by the way. I could hear the sound of feet rushing around out there. There was someone out there. And now they were leaning against the frosted glass, attempting to peer into my room. I barely had a second to think about what to do when I heard, "Ah, so you are awake. Get out here." It was screamed with such rage. I knew the owner of that voice was a female. She seemed hysterical. She started hammering on my windows. I had no idea who she was. Despite my curtains being drawn, I guess there was enough light spilling around the edges for her to realize that someone was home and awake. I really began to panic now. I didn't know what to do. I knew that this person wasn't just going to give up and walk away anymore. We were past the doorbell ringing now. While she started blasting her hands against my windows, I tried to think about what to do next. I thought that the best thing I could do for the time being would be to leave the room. For some reason, I ran up to the roof of the apartment building. I can't tell you why I did this. I was panicked, sleep deprived, and honestly, pretty terrified. I wasn't thinking straight. I just needed to get away from that woman's screams and that horrible banging sound. Once I got onto the roof and I had composed myself, I called the police. This is where you're all going to think I'm such an idiot. The police told me they would be there in no longer than 10 minutes, so I decided to go back to my room to get a look at who was down there. For some reason, I felt the need to see the woman's face. It's such a stupid thing to do, now that I think back to it, but at the time, I just couldn't help it. I got back down there, presumably fueled by adrenaline, and I couldn't get my door open. Something else was wrong. It didn't sound as if she was outside anymore. I pressed my ear to my door and realized that the woman was in my room. I could hear her laughing and going wild in there. Immediately, I returned to the safety of the roof. Since my room no longer felt safe, the roof was all I had left. While I was up there, I heard the police arrive. I went downstairs again with my keys at their request and unlocked my door. Then I swiftly darted behind the police officer. With the door now open, I could see the woman in my room running rampant. She looked so angry, her hair was unkempt, and she just glared at us in such a horrible manner. She was shouting someone's name that wasn't my own. Like they say, humans are scarier than any ghost story, and she petrified me. The officers restrained her and took her away. I had to go to the police station to make a statement, but before I did, I took one look around my apartment and saw that everything was destroyed. There was glass smashed everywhere, plates, my TV, etc. The most devastating thing to see was my PC there in ruins. No more games. According to a couple of stories I heard after the event from the residents and the police, the woman was having some sort of an affair with the former resident in my apartment. Some had said that she was in hospital for a good while for her mental health, and when she was discharged, this was the first place she came to exact some sort of revenge on her ex-lover. It was all a case of mistaken identity. I had to rebuy all the stuff she trashed since I didn't have home insurance. I moved apartments too, since I didn't want a repeat of that night. It took a long while to get together enough money to get a new PC. I don't use this new one for gaming though. I am studying harder than I ever have before. If you live alone, please take care of yourself and stay safe. Sounds cliche, but what happened to me was so terrifying. I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
About 6 years ago, I was living in a really old and small apartment. I guess that it was about half a year since I moved in when this happened. I heard the sound of my doorbell chiming in the middle of the night. Of course, it woke me up. It was really annoying. I wasn't expecting anyone to be turning up at that hour. I ignored it because I thought that it must have been a prank or an accident or something. It kept going though, and it really annoyed me, so I got up and I yelled at whoever was messing me through the door. Things quietened down out there, and I thought that that would be the last of it, but just as I turned my light off and got back into bed, I heard the sound of the doorbell again. This time the doorbell rang only a few times. What followed was a bit more sinister. I heard the sound of the door handle being tried and the door shaking in its frame with the force of someone trying to open it. I put on my best macho voice and yelled at the person who was doing this, and they seemed to back off. This hiatus only lasted until the following night, when the same midnight visitor did the exact same thing. They rang the doorbell and they tried the door handle. By the time the third night of this harassment rolled around, I had had enough. I was thinking about calling the police, but before I did that, I had another idea. Right before midnight, I covered my doorknob in superglue. I thought that it would be a great way to catch whoever was doing this, red-handed. As soon as they would fall for the trap, I'd call the cops, and then the cops could take them away. I don't care if I sound cruel here, a lesson needed to be learned. That night I couldn't sleep. I was excited to see what would happen. I stayed up way later than I wanted to. I guess it was around 4 a.m. when I heard the footsteps of someone stealthily creeping down the hall. I heard them approach my door. I heard them reach out and touch the door handle. And then I heard them try to open it like they had done for the last 3 nights. I actually smiled in my bed, satisfied that I had caught them. The person shook my door handle for 2 long intervals, as usual, and then they went to leave, and I heard them shake my door handle in a different way. I sensed their inaudible panic, and I loved it. I called out to my would-be intruder, "Dumbass, I'm calling the cops now. They'll be here any second." As soon as I said this, the rattling at my door stopped. It went silent, and I dialed the police. After about 10 minutes or so, the police came to my apartment. They asked me to open the door. I couldn't wait to see this creepy person with their hands superglued to my door, so I shot out there. There was no one out there but a police officer. I couldn't understand it. Was this some kind of brush with the paranormal? Was I imagining it all, I wondered? I thought that I was going mad for a second, and then the police prompted me to take a look at the door handle. I saw a bright red handprint on my door handle. Whoever had been doing this had ripped their hand from the door, leaving a bloody palm print there. Seeing that layer of skin around the door handle creeped me out in a big way. This happened not too long ago, and as far as I know, the person who did this hasn't been caught yet. I often wonder about what their intentions were had they got in. Or had I been a vulnerable person? And why they were so desperate to rip their skin off to get free? Something sinister was behind their intentions, I'm sure of it. I need to move.
This happened to me last December. It's the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. I began living alone last summer. I managed to get an apartment pretty close to my parents' house. It was in a 2-story building. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and in the middle. The rent was cheap, and I loved having my own independence. I went to a party, drank a lot, and got the last train back home. I arrived at my station and started walking home. The thing about the area I lived in was that it was a little shady. It's probably somewhere you don't want to be walking around alone at night. There are lots of alleys. I didn't really mind though, since my parents lived close by. I remember I was stumbling along in my tipsy state, searching in my handbag for my keys as I drew closer to my apartment. I was only about 30 meters away from my apartment when I heard something strange. It sounded like there was something continuously banging against something. Had it been the afternoon, it would have been easy to imagine that this sound would be a construction worker or someone doing DIY. But at night, it was odd, and it was getting louder the closer I approached the apartment block. I went up the stairs, and when I turned the corner, I froze in horror. In front of my apartment, there was a woman. She was banging my door with her fist in a monotonous, rhythmic pattern. I could instantly tell that there was something wrong with this person. She looked like a ghost. She looked so pale, exhausted, and frightening. I felt like running off back to my parents' house. I didn't want to tangle with that woman. I stood there shaking for a few horrible moments, with keys in hand, and then I heard them fall to the floor. As soon as my keys hit the ground, the strange woman stopped her rhythmic banging on my door. I froze. I couldn't pick up my keys. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She turned her head towards me slowly, and the only thing I can remember after that was the sound of my footfall coming back down the stairs. I ran as fast and as far away as I could. Finally, I stopped in front of a nearby convenience store. I guess I must have dropped my cell phone while I sprinted. I asked to use the one at the convenience store. I don't think I was capable of walking down any more dark alleys or countryside roads in search of a phone booth. The police came and they went to my place. My keys and my phone couldn't be found, unfortunately, but on the upside, there were no signs of intrusion to my apartment. I stayed with my parents that night. I arranged for the locks to be changed, but I didn't feel like moving back in there. The threat of that woman coming back was too much for me. I don't know what that was about, but I don't ever want to see that woman again. When I think about her, I can't help but shudder. I was too scared to try and call my cell phone, to try and figure out where it was. I got my mom to do it. She called it, but no one answered. I stopped the service to that phone a day later. I didn't like it. I didn't want to go back to that apartment. I moved in with my parents, but there was an issue. My parents have a cat, and I have a parakeet. Like I said before, it was a good job that my parents lived so close by, so my parents could go back and forth to feed the parakeet. We can't keep this up forever though. I don't know why, but I feel like the woman has a grudge against me.
This happened when I lived at my old place. I was relaxing in the living room on a quiet Sunday evening, dusk in fact. My doorbell rang. I had an intercom in the room, so I went over and pressed the button and said, "Yes?" Is this Mr. Yamaguchi's house? A voice replied. No, sorry, it's not, I answered. I was half expecting a sorry for disturbing you or something like that. But nope, this person was lacking some manners. I began to walk back to the living room. On my way back, I heard the door chime again. Just like before, I answered, and a voice replied. Is this Mr. Yamaguchi's house? Clearly it was the same person as before. I could tell by the voice. It was a kind of gloomy, depressed female voice. No, I said it wasn't. Who's this, by the way? I said. They must have let go of the intercom button, just like they had done the last time, because no answer came back. I hated this rudeness. Outside the door next to the apartment number is my nameplate, so there was no excuse to confuse me with this Yamaguchi guy, whoever that was. It was completely obvious that he didn't live here. I want to stay anon here, so all I can say is my name sounds nothing like that. The doorbell rang again. I was really annoyed now. I decided to go to the door this time, to look through the peephole. I wanted to see who was messing with me. There was no one out there. Weird. I opened the door but left the chain on to try and get a better angle of the hallway, and still, I couldn't see anyone out there. I wondered if it was a ding-dong ditch at this point. I closed the door and went to go back to the living room, and just as I turned my back, I heard the doorbell ring again. I started to get freaked out now. I quickly looked through the peephole, but again, no one was there. I thought that this had gone on long enough. I took the chain off the door and opened it to see if I could find out who was doing this. I looked everywhere, but there was no one out there in that hall. I checked all the possible blind spots and places to hide, but again I came up empty. The corridor was long. There really shouldn't be anywhere for people to hide out there anyway. I stood there puzzled for a moment, when suddenly I heard, "Why didn't you open the door?" The voice came from behind me, and it terrified me. It sounded so hateful, like it was coming from the pit of hell. The issue was, my back was facing my apartment. I was leaning out of the door, so whoever said that was in the apartment. This was impossible. How could someone have got past me without me knowing? I didn't have time to think about it. I just ran for it. I ran to a nearby convenience store. I went over what had just happened, and I realized I needed to call someone. With my hands still shaking, I dug my phone out of my pocket and called my real estate agent. Hi, yeah, I live in room 101. Yeah, I think there's someone in my room, someone dangerous maybe, I stammered. Sir, don't you think the police would be better placed to attend to this issue? The realtor rightly said. No, not police, I don't think. This is where you're probably gonna laugh, but I don't think that was a human. The realtor went silent for a moment and said, Just a moment, sir, I'll transfer you to the manager. Now, I spoke with the manager. They didn't know why I had been transferred, but they were nice about the situation. I guess I must have freaked out the person who answered the phone. We spoke for a while, and the manager said that I wasn't the first person who had lived in that room who has reported an incident like that. The apartment's quite old, and the manager said that she hadn't had any complaints in the last few years, which was why she didn't mention this to me before moving in. By the way, this Yamaguchi guy did actually live in the building. After a while, his rent fell into arrears. The realtors went to check on his well-being to find that everything he owned, and the man himself, had disappeared. No one knew where he went. It's true that he lived in the building, but he didn't rent my apartment. So from time to time, residents reported that they had heard someone going from door to door, asking for him. I stayed with a friend that night. I went back to my apartment the next day. I tried to continue living there, but when I was in bed at night, my mind would torment me with that horrible voice. I got to a point where I couldn't stand being alone in there. I felt cold, and a strong sense that something didn't want me there. I moved out within the month, and thankfully I have had no one come to my new place looking for Mr. Yamaguchi.